Hello, my name's James. I just wanted to do a little tour of my Emacs setup. I've been using Emacs for a number of years now. I really like it, but one of the big challenges I have is it's actually pretty hard to recommend Emacs to beginning programmers because there's so much going on there. It can be quite complicated. I just wanted to kind of show generally from a high level what my setup is like to hopefully give people a reasonable place to try to get started. Um, One of the things too that I think is maybe different from Emacs or Vim compared to modern editors like Visual Studio Code or Sublime or whatever people are primarily using now is that I think you really need to customize them to get the most out of them. You can just start using VS Code or Sublime and like works pretty well. But I think if you just use like vanilla Emacs out of the box, it might be fine. But I think you're really missing out. I think part of the beauty and the power of Emacs in particular is that you can do so much with it, and you can really shape the program to be exactly what you want, exactly what you need. Um, Not so much saying that like efficiency is the main thing. 'Cause I mean, efficiency is what your boss wants you to do. But for me, it's like I like using my computer more if I can make the tools in there be exactly what I want. So that's kind of why I think it's really important to customize Emacs. That being said, I think it's also really important for you to kind of own that customization. I think it's kind of tempting for people to start using some of these packages like Spacemacs or Doom Emacs or Accenture Emacs. There's all these things that try to pre-configure a bunch of things. And those can be fun, they can look really cool when you start, but my perspective on those is that if you start with those things, you miss out one of the best things about Emacs, which is not only is it super customizable, but you can really actually know how the whole thing works, and you can know how every aspect of it works. You can drill all the way down to the C code underlying it. And I think if you just use these pre-packaged things, you miss out on a lot of that because now you have these. It's still this big complicated thing that you don't really know how it works. Things get complicated. So I really like a procedure of trying to start with just like a plain, simple Emacs and then incrementally add things. The problem with doing that, if you just kind of start plain Emacs, start adding things in a file, that's how I originally started with Emacs, many years ago. You end up with this like one big file, and it's really hard to keep track of things. You don't know what you did where. So while I think it's important for you to like own the customizations, I think you need to still have kind of a structured way. So as I said, I started with Emacs many years ago. Started, kind of that one file. This is before like packages or anything. So all this stuff just get dropped into one big file. Eventually, it gets unmaintainable. You don't know how to use it. I switched to Vim. Used Vim for a number of years, and then when I came back to Emacs, I wanted to find like a reasonable place to start. So the thing I actually started with was Hi Emacs, which is this kind of Emacs, not exactly a distribution, but something like that, kind of an initial starter package by Bodle. So I started using this kind of as a template, but the key thing is what I did. I looked at this, I used this as kind of an idea for how I wanted to start with things, but then I had manually copied things. So I looked at the structure, said, okay, we have our init.el is where we start, and so I opened my own init.el and started just typing things in because I wanted to make sure I actually understood everything. So I tried, mostly nothing was copy pasted, it was directly typed in because I wanted to understand it. So that being said, let's have a look at my setup. So we're going to start, so I'm using the new Emacs built from source. So now the config file lives in like Emacs or .config slash Emacs slash init.el. If you're using Emacs like pre 27, it'll be in your like home slash .emacs.d or whatever. Important thing is, so I start with my init.el. I have some kind of initial setup stuff. This is kind of one of the important things. Most Emacs files now are going to start with this, is to make Emacs Lisp do things in the new way. So the first bit is kind of this init.el is mostly kind of get stuff set up, kind of bootstrap things for the rest of stuff to be ready to go. So the starting is just something to try to, this is to tell me how long it's taking to start, because I was trying to tune it to start up faster, so I still have this here. I'll maybe point out now, I haven't really gone through and cleaned stuff up. I just wanted to feel like this is what my Emacs config stuff looks like, just as it is. The particular details aren't important. I'll put a link to the .files repo so you can have a look at it. The point of this today, at least, isn't really to go so much in detail and all the weird little things that have accumulated, more just the overall structure. So init.el, we start, kind of the first thing is setting up the name of the .files directory, because everything's going to be relative to here. So it just figures out, based on the name of this init file. One of the first key things is adding to the load path a subdirectory of this thing called modules. That's where I put most of the specific files I'm going to be loading to get config in. I still have a comment here saying I don't actually know if I still need this. I think this is an old thing. I don't know. It's still there. I tell it to put the customization stuff. So using the Emacs customize interface, put them in a particular file here so I can keep it tracked with my Git. I tell it to load that file. And now kind of the meat of this is loading all these packages. So these are all cogent-whatever. That's like the namespace I'm using for my stuff. My website's occasionally Cogent, so Cogent is kind of the short little name here. So I load a whole bunch of these modules, and then I load a user.el. So these modules are kind of the meat of these things. I'll kind of have a quick look over those. And the user.el, and the theory, these are more like site configuration stuff. In practice, so user.el is a combination of different config to run my Emacs config on different computers, just because there's different setups. Some things I need to configure things slightly differently, and then just some personal setup stuff that didn't really fit anywhere here. So so all these modules that I'm loading, kind of the first bunch are kind of these key ones. So we can start looking at here. So the first one we'll say is Cogent package. So this is setting up fetching packages, because there's a lot of third-party packages that I use here. I try not to use too many of these, because I think if you just pull in third-party packages for everything, things just kind of start to get messy, start losing track of what's doing what. But there's lots of useful things out there. So a little helper methods to check if it's online or not. This is setting up straight.el, which is the kind of the package manager thing I use. In Emacs, I like this because it pulls specific Git repositories and then lets me pin by the commit. So this is both useful. One, it lets me easily pull in packages that aren't in a package repository yet. I can just directly fetch a Git repository. And then it also lets me freeze specific versions, which is nice for not having my config break, being able to port between different computers. So this is just from the config, or the README for straight, just doing this bootstrapping. Sets up use package. I also require EL patch, thing for patching libraries, whatever. So this is pretty simple, part of this initial setup. If we go back here, so the next one would be the general. So this is kind of just generic stuff, lots of little helper functions. So this is where I just have things like little helper functions for setting path. This uses a library to set the path based on my shell. Kind of just like the general setup stuff, where to put .files, some general config stuff. Just, as I said, it's just general config stuff. We have Cogent base. Again, the split here is pretty arbitrary. I just put some stuff someplace, some stuff in other. So this is pulling in some of these standard library packages. Some of these I don't know how relevant they still are. More just kind of little helper functions. So some helper functions for replacing symbols, for running stuff, like finding the right, finding executables, asking for a password, getting config stuff. So kind of some general base setup. So keys. So the only thing it's really doing here is pulling in, somewhat confusingly, a package named general, which is a Emacs package for doing key configuration. This is what I use for doing most of this stuff, because as we'll see later, I use evil mode for the Vim key bindings in Emacs. This makes it easy to define key bindings both in like Emacs modes and various Vim modes. So this is just requiring that. The appearance is a big one. Oops. So appearance is just like doing all this configuration setup. I've done some kind of little stuff of my own because I find the way Emacs themes work is a little confusing, where if you just load a theme, it applies it additively on the theme you already had, which I find confusing. So I have this little setup here to make it, if you load a theme, it deactivates the theme before it, and also made a thing so I can run like a hook for activating a particular theme, which lets me like change other stuff because there's some things that I want to programmatically change when a theme changes. I probably could do this by patching a theme, but that would be a lot of work. This also pulls in the mode line library, which is just, I wrote a little thing. I can just pop this open. This is in kind of a weird state, this mode line one, because I switched recently from using a dark color theme to a light color theme. So all these color stuffs default to dark, and they do a bunch of weird stuff to change it to be light. The mode line stuff is maybe be a thing of to itself, how I kind of make this work the way it does. But this is just the loading the stuff that sets up the mode line, makes it look the way I want. As I say, that I've written a blog post about customizing the mode line. I don't know, maybe I'll do another video on that, who knows. The theme I was using for the dark theme is the Dracula theme. So we see this is just loading it, and I'm defining my hook thing here. As I said, this is like a thing I made so I can have a specific function run when a theme activates. So I was using this here to, when I activate the theme, set a bunch of other faces that the theme doesn't cover to make that automatically happen when I switch there. I was previously had solarized. I'm not using it. I could probably just delete that. I don't really need it here anymore. But whatever, just delete it. The one I'm currently using is this flat UI theme with a bunch of other config stuff. I have some comments wondering why I need to do this thing here, because I've seen weird stuff when making new frames, the mode line, whatever. Emacs is constantly an adventure, always finding weird things to happen. So this is mostly just like setting a bunch of faces, doing a bunch of config stuff, pulling in the vital neon cat mode. You may have noticed a little neon cat scroll bar at the bottom. Pulls this in. I use diminish to hide a bunch of stuff. I don't really need it to hide stuff so much anymore because of the way I do the mode line. It doesn't show minor modes. I do like using this thing to display little fancy characters instead of the mode names. You may have noticed in the bottom of the mode line here, instead of Emacs list, but shows a little GNU head list. So I have little, it's like fun images for that. So various things here, setting the faces. Let's go back to init el. Fonts, you can probably guess what happens there. Loading fonts, some helper functions for finding fonts. Nothing terribly interesting. The actual setting the font happens in the user. I have windows for doing window management stuff, so packages involving switching things around. I have some stuff here where I was previously using eyebrows, and I had a separate config there for eyebrows. I'm using, let's say, a new version of Emacs, so now I have tabs. So now I don't need to use eyebrows anymore, but I just keep the config here where it just checks if it has that, and if it does, then I set up a bunch of key bindings for eyebrow or for tabs to be more what I expect, and I turn on winter mode, which is then to make it easy to navigate Windows. So Windows. Some of the names, I will admit, are perhaps a little confusing. This has nothing to do with the operating system. Cogent Evil is a pretty big one. This is setting up the evil key binding stuff. Bunch of like custom key bindings, because as I mentioned before, I used Vim for many years, so there's a bunch of stuff I wanted to bring over, like port some Vim packages, so this also has a bunch of that. Just bunch of stuff, bunch of Vim packages, kind of replicating some things. A note here that this needs to load before org. So those are kind of the base packages. So all these other ones are now more specific tools. I would maybe include Helm as another important base package. Yes, I use Helm for everything. This is it's the kind of complete anything. I really like it because it actually makes it quite easy to like add actions and add key bindings and add sources to the different things. Thing I like doing a lot. So again, I got used to in Vim is when I'm say going to switch to another file and I have like init.el. instead of hitting enter and opening it, sometimes I want to press the key to have it open in like a vertical or like a horizontal split. So I was able to add an action there. So there's a million actions you can take. The one that I wrote the stuff to add is I can press, say, Control V to open it in a vertical split. So tons of stuff there. Helm is a whole other topic to itself. I really like it. It's super, super customizable. One of the piece of software or editor things I use so much. I support the author's Patreon because it's great, and it would I'd be a lot worse off if I couldn't use it. So those are kind of the general things. Bunch of stuff about various programming languages, code style. I mean, org mode. Org is its whole other topic. This is loading org, doing a bunch of org config stuff. So a lot of these things are for different programming languages. So I have eLisp, the SX stuff for various Lisps. I do a lot of work in Clojure and obviously Emacs Lisp, so this handles those. This is setting up completion stuff. Kind of have like a generic editing stuff. Again, like editing versus base versus general, those could probably all be somewhat merged together. Project stuff, directory stuff, a bunch of programming language specific things. Like git config, that mostly pulls in the great Magit library, I believe is how it's pronounced, and pulling in the various things there. It's great. Using git is actually bearable in Magit. I used to be only use git in the command line guy, but switching to Emacs, like, oh, Magit is actually way better. So doing a bunch of mode specific things. I probably have the most config stuff in Clojure, because that's one of the ones that I use for work. So bunch of like fancy bindings here, doing stuff with like cider eval stuff, setting up again bindings to make it like how it was in my Vim setup. Most of these other ones are not much. Like, I haven't used Elixir in a long time. I think this is probably just pulling in an Elixir mode. HTML, JavaScript, Rust, just pulling in the modes. Prolog's another language I like. This just pulls in some basic stuff. This is actually using a version of Prolog mode that I've like kind of made some modifications to, hacked up a little. Markdown, I barely use Markdown anymore because I use org. So a bunch of programming language specific stuff, just pulling in those the configs for those. Then there's a bunch of others, kind of like generic, like helpful tools that I use in Emacs. So if we go to Cogent Reading, this is pulling in the main one being, well, the only one here, PDF tools, which is great. I used to just really not like reading electronic books, like ebooks, PDFs, whatever. Didn't really like it. I always felt like I was going to lose my place. Like, I love reading, but I found it really awkward to do that. But PDF tool is actually like a super nice experience for reading PDFs. And then org PDF tools integrates it so I can save links to a particular page in an org file. So I really like this. Is kind of, I keep track of, I'm like running to-do lists. I just keep a link to the page I was currently on in whatever book, so I can just jump right back to where it was. So quite like it, very handy. Some other like helpful tools for like non-programming stuff. Mail, I use not much to read my mail in Emacs, and it's great. I love it. I mean, as much as you can love dealing with email, it at least makes me happy that I'm doing it in Emacs. Feed, so I use Alfeed as a newsreader in Emacs. So try to do a lot of stuff in Emacs. Help is for doing like getting help for Emacs specific stuff. Snippets is Yas snippets to pull in snippets, helpful completion things. Contact now and expands to the current date. All sorts of things like that. Yas snippets will have stuff for specific languages. Again, the config file here isn't terribly interesting because it's just loading it. The main thing is like defining the snippets. LSP is for language servers, which again, the only one I'm really reusing now is for Prolog, which is a language server I made. So not much going on there. Fish is setting up. I have tried switching to the fish shell. So this is just setting up completion for fish. Nothing terribly interesting there. Writing, IRC, I'm not really using IRC anymore. I was using it. It's a Slack bridge, but no, I just don't read Slack, so whatever. And tools is kind of become my dumping bag for miscellaneous things. So checking disk usage. Pass, I use the Pass as a password manager. Does that. KeyCast, using for making little, well, in conjunction with this GIF screencast using for recording little like animated videos of doing stuff in Emacs. Duramv, next one, so a bunch of like kind of random little helper packages live in this. Some of these could probably go to different places, like dumjump should probably go in project. vterm should probably go in shell, but this is kind of, if I'm adding a new package, I don't have another place, I'll usually just put it in tools. So that's kind of the idea with most of the tools. So broadly, there's kind of these core packages, and then I'll make one generally for each programming language. But clearly I have some, if it's just like pulling into the thing, I'll have like MISC languages, where if I just want to try out a new programming language, I'll import its mode in here. So then the other main thing is user EL, and this is where I just throw kind of general other stuff. So as I set the font, acquire thing, this is for setting up all the fancy ligatures and stuff, whatever. So this is an artifact of stuff from before I was using, I had different ways of loading paths, using this to add extra things to the exec path. I'm using now another package that makes it kind of redundant, but it's still here. It's just not being called anywhere. But you know, I should probably clean that up. Just configuration for like different computers. So this config is kind of for the computer I'm on now. For other computers, see if you can guess the theme for how I name my computers. You know, they need different font sizes. They need different path setup. Macs need some other finagling. So they also have like slightly different config stuff. This is how I choose to put them. There's probably other ways I could get fancier. I could have it like source a file with the system name.el or something. Might be a cool other way of doing this, but this works. It's fine for me. Doing some like global keys, so defining things on the function keys. This is kind of where I just choose to put those, kind of top level stuff. And then just doing various other things like my own tiny little helper functions that I want to have, things that don't really belong anywhere else, just like random, like one-off little hacky functions. This is a thing which, God, I don't need this anymore. It's a Emacs 27 where things have gone less weird for eShell. So this is where I just kind of put random other stuff, some org config. So users where I just throw, random stuff. The very end thing is started the server running. So that lets me just easily pop up new frames. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour of how I configure my Emacs thing. Again, not going into the details so much, but I will put a link to the config if you want to look in more detail. I just thought it might be useful to people to have an idea, like how do you get started? Like what's a good structure to have in your Emacs so you can start configuring stuff without getting lost later. So I hope this was interesting. Please let me know if you found this useful or interesting. Have a good day.